So now it's time to go ahead and start building the body. And this piece of wood is less than desirable. I mean, it will work, but it's got some problems with it. This was actually a piece that I cut off of that 9-foot piece of mahogany that I talked about earlier. We've got some holes right here. We've got little knots, not too big of a deal. Little knot, not big of a deal. So we have some gouging that happened right here, where it looks like something fell on this piece of wood. Up in this area, we've got a big knot. The reality is I still might be able to get a good guitar body out of this. And the first thing that I need to do is I have to have my template. And in this case, I'm going to be using an Orion template. And what I want to do is I want to see that if I can carefully place this, let me move this so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. That if I carefully place this from the center line, giving myself a little bit extra, in other words, the center line is here, but the wood is actually extending a little bit beyond, I might be able to get 2 pieces out of this and only have to deal with a small amount of error, maybe like right here where it looked like something has fallen on it. Now, if this is going to be a painted Orion, this will be fine. A little bit of Bondo is not going to hurt anything right there. If this is something, though, that is going to be finished, where you're going to see everything, it's going to have a natural finish. That, on the other hand, that's not good. So we would have an area like this that would be bad. Okay, but by getting this and then turning it upside down, there's not enough room right there. If I come over here, there's still not enough room. If I bring it down this way and do it, there would be, okay? But I'm going to be running into that knot. But this is something that you can think about here. Right here and right here, okay, is basically where I would have to draw my line. And I'm not going to end up using this piece, but I wanted to show you something, okay? I can get away with this, and the reason why is because the knot is right where the cavity would go. So that knot would actually end up coming out of the guitar. Now we have a crack here. I can't use this piece. But if you had a knot and you carefully position your template, you would see we avoid the holes, and we would also end up avoiding this. This would come out. Many times when you flip this over, you'll see that the knot doesn't really go all the way through. And because it doesn't go all the way through, that means that by the time that we route out a large portion of the electronics cavity, this whole knot issue will be gone. It won't be affecting us anymore. So it's careful placement. When you have a piece of wood, it's careful placement. So even though you might have a piece that's not really desirable, many people would say, well, we can't use this piece because of this, that, and the other thing. It's too ugly. By me doing something like this, if this crack was not here, I could get away with using this piece if this crack right there wasn't there. Up here, the same thing. We're only dealing with a little bit of this being gouged out from something hitting it. And by the time that this gets cut out and you put Bondo on it, because of the way that the Orion is, this portion right here actually gets taken out anyway with a large roundover bit. You wouldn't even see this. You wouldn't even have to put Bondo. Okay? It's important to keep that type of stuff in mind. That even though it's not perfect, right? Many times you can actually still use the piece of wood. Now, if this was for something like a neck, the exact same thing. We have straight grain here. We could probably get away with making some necks out of this. If I ended up taking my neck template here, and I said, well, what about this? Okay, so we'll put we got this lined up with the grain pretty well. I'm going to use a Sharpie because you won't be able to see it if I'm just using a pencil. But if I come over here like this, you'll see that this actually is almost, this is actually pretty good. I don't care for this too much right here, but this is still workable. This is a 2-inch piece of mahogany, so I could get 2 necks out of this right here, okay? I try to use as much wood as I can, the good portions. Another thing I could do is, when you have leftover pieces like this, you know, you can take those and say, well, it's not enough for half of a guitar, but it might be enough for a third of a guitar. And there's nothing wrong with getting pieces of wood and just gluing them together to make it the size that you need it in order to make your body. Now, in a case like this, where we've got the body, let me draw this out so you can see it better. This piece isn't bad, and what I can do is I can sit there and cut this piece out, and later on down the line I might find another piece of material that will actually be good enough, and I can say, well, I already have half of the body, right? I can use this other piece of wood for the other half of the body. Now, like I said, I can't use this wood for really anything other than either half of a guitar body right here or for 2 necks. If this was a little bit longer, I could probably get away with some stuff. This is a lower portion of the body, just like this is a lower portion of the body, and because of that, you know, I mean, if I ended up building this, it wouldn't. If I cut these out, these two wouldn't match, okay? Because I need to have the upper part and the lower part. This is just 2 lower parts. I only wanted to show you this so that way it gives you a way of thinking and laying out your wood, okay? Let's say that this is ready to roll though, okay, that we are going to end up cutting this out, and we are going to use this for our wood. The next step is to take this to the bandsaw. You cut your 1/8 inch all the way around, just like we did with the neck on both pieces. This side has to be perfectly flat, okay, on both sides. We need to make sure that this is perfectly flat and straight. We need a good gluing surface. And the way that I do that is I run it through a joiner. Now, if you don't have a joiner, you can run this through a table saw or a bandsaw, get very close to that perfectly straight cut, and then run a plane over it, a hand plane, and then that will get it very flat as well, okay? Anytime that you have half of a guitar right here and you have another piece you're going to attach, it should be perfectly tight. I mean, it should just, when you put it up against there, you should see no gaps. It should be perfect. Now let's go ahead and look at this piece. Now this is a piece of mahogany that I'm going to be using for an OGS build, and you can see here that the wood is actually very nice. You know, I mean, we got a little bit of grain right here I'm not perfectly happy with, but ultimately it's very nice. And when I come over here, I have a very, very similar grain pattern that goes up and down over on this side. Now, is this absolutely ideal? No, ideally I'd want this piece of the grain not to be curved like that. I'd want it to be straight like it is over here. I wouldn't want to see this discoloring right here. Anytime that you see discoloring, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does tell you that the composition of this portion of wood is different than the composition of this wood over here. And then so you're going to have something that it's not equal, right? In other words, it's like you're changing density, you're changing strength, you're changing something. And that's, you know, I try to keep things as consistent as I can. But in this case, once again, this would have to be perfectly flat. And when you buy these pieces of wood like this, you're going to often find that you've got like this resaw marking on the side of it. And you can see water damage, okay? So the reason why this has been discolored is because of water damage. You can see it on this side. It's the way that they store it at the hardwood places that you'd purchase your hardwood at. Okay, but once again, I'd give myself an 1/8. I would cut this out on the bandsaw, and I'd have 2 rough pieces, and then from there I'd glue those 2 pieces together. Now here's a piece of maple that I was practicing some coloring on, trying to match some stuff. And I have no use for this piece of maple. It's really too small for me to use for anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in half, and before I do it, I'm going to run this through the joiner to make sure that this side's perfectly flat, this side's perfectly flat. And I'll cut this, and then I'll show you how to glue these two together and clamp them together. And this is exactly how you would do it for any guitar body. It doesn't make a difference what shape it is or whatnot. So now that we have these and they're nice and flat, when I get these guys and I put them together, there isn't a seam. I mean, there's a seam, but you don't see anything. There's no gaps, okay? That's important. Now, when I first started building guitars years ago, I didn't use a joiner. Many times what I would do is I would just cut it with a table saw, and I would sand it with a block. And I got pretty good results that way, but this is really the best way to do it. So just like doing the neck, what we want to do is we want to put glue on here. We don't want too much and we don't want too little. We don't want to leave it like this. We want to spread it, okay? We want a nice even coat over the entire piece here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these two pieces of wood and I'm going to kind of slide them back and forth, okay? And I want to make sure that both pieces of wood now have glue on them equally. I could have used the brush and did it on the other side, but I risk putting too much glue on here, and I've said it many times before, too much glue is just as bad as too little glue. From here, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and start putting pressure on this, making sure that the top and bottom are lined up, okay? Sometimes these guys will want to go like this, and you'll have to kind of shift it and hold it with your hand and stuff. You know, you make sure that everything's lined up. I have it in the center here, I have it in the center here, and I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on it. I'll start seeing some glue pop up, and you're going to see that right here. I'm doing the same thing, going about center. Make sure that the back here is also flush, which it is. Make sure the top up here is flush, which it is. And I want to put a decent amount of pressure on this. I want to see glue escape from that seam, but I don't want to see all of it escape, because it'll, you know, you can push out a lot of the glue and make this a very weak bond. And then here now in a couple of hours, this will be set up enough that we could actually start working on this and doing whatever we're planning on doing. Now, this particular body is what we're going to be doing. This is what I'm going to be making in the video. We have two pieces of mahogany. They've been glued together. And, you know, it's important to be considering the grain. Well, especially if this is going to be a natural finish where you're going to be able to see everything, right? You wouldn't want to have grain going this direction and then on this side the grain going the same direction. That would look strange. You know, if you had it like this, it would look more symmetrical. You wouldn't want to have it, you know, going this way and then getting this and flipping it, you know, and it would look strange, right? So when gluing the pieces together, try to find a pattern that looks consistent, nice and even, okay? So now what we're going to do is, this has been glued together, and you're going to see that this portion of the wood is kind of rough right here. It's okay, that's going to come off. We've got some glue that came out of there. We have some that's come out of here as well. And I need to make this nice and flat and perfect. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to run this through my planer. Now, you might not have a planer. You don't need a planer. You can just spend some time with a random orbital sander, or maybe even sanding by hand, just trying to make this perfectly flat, nice and neat, nice perfect top and nice perfect bottom. Also making sure that we're dealing with the right thickness. Bodies generally are 1 3/4 thick, depending on the manufacturer. But I would say 99% of the time they're 1 3/4 inch thick, okay? And so I'm going to take this, I'm going to run it through the planer, and then when it comes back I'm going to have a nice flat surface on both sides, something that I can attach my template to. So now that this is out of the planer, there's actually a couple of areas I'm concerned about. This right here looks like this might be potentially weak as far as the grain, and I won't know for sure until I start routing. But what I can do to make sure that this does not break during the time that I'm actually routing this is, you know, go very slow, small increments. You don't go crazy with it, just like we did with the neck. But this is flat enough now for me to go ahead and attach a template. although we can't really see it, we have two pieces that were glued together, and I'm going to use that as my center line. I always do, because it makes your job a lot easier when it comes to lining things up and doing measurements and having a proper center and all that other good stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now put a piece of double stick tape here, and I'm going to put some maybe right here, and a small piece right here, and that's enough. It doesn't require too much. Now, the way that I usually do this is I have a very, very large router bit, and this very large router bit it'll follow the template, just like the one that we did for the neck, but it cuts all of this at the exact same time, so I don't have to do it in increments. And like I mentioned before, I'm trying to show you how to do this at home, with minimal tools. But right now I'm going to put my center on my center line, and I'm going to line this center up here with the center line, making sure I've got my 1/8 all the way around. Okay, all of this is going to work. This needs to move forward ever so slightly though. So now, just like with the neck, this is ready to be routed out. And just like the neck, I'm going to be, once again, using a Ryobi router. It's a cheap router. Like I said, I usually use Bosch, but this one worked just fine. And I'm going to be using the exact same template bit that I used before. So now that the second pass is finished, I can do a third pass and a fourth pass, and I just keep going down until that this is finished. But now there's no need for me to keep this template on here anymore, unless I'm going to be doing a left-handed body. If I'm doing a left-handed body, then I'd want to keep this template on because this is the rear of it, and I could go ahead and route these cavities out. And I would use the exact same bit, the exact same router, everything in order to route this out. So you don't change anything. Now, before I continue routing the rest of the outside away, I do want to talk a little bit about cavities. Okay. Now, when you're routing out a cavity, you have to know how deep you're planning on going. Okay. Now, if you're doing a Floyd Rose, you need to know how deep is this. Okay. Once again, you check with the bridge manufacturer. They usually will have measurements. They'll tell you this should be 5/8 of an inch, or something along those lines. As soon as it's 5/8 of an inch, boom. Okay, don't go any further, because the amount of wood that's between the bottom of this cutout and the bottom of the pickup isn't very much, right? We're only dealing with 1 3/4 inches total. So you have 5/8 here, and then if you end up having maybe 3/4 to 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch on the front for the pickups, you're getting closer and closer to accidentally going through. When you have something like a cavity for electronics, you have to remember that you're going to be putting a cover on the guitar, right? You're going to have to make some kind of cover. And in order for that to happen, you have to have a lip, okay? And so after you end up cutting this out, you can buy bits like this and get different size bearings for it. And what will happen is the bearing will ride here, and it will cut a lip all the way around the outside of it. And that's how you put your lips on here. And whatever thickness of the material you're using, that's how deep you want this to go. Generally it's going to be less than 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch or less, okay? And that's how you end up putting your lips on. But I'm going to go ahead and finish the routing of this on the outside. As soon as I'm done routing the outside of this, I'm going to show you some things that sometimes happen and how you can fix them. And it's really based on chip out, okay? Chip out and things like that. And I'll show you how that's done, because you will come across it, and it's not that big of a deal. And the last portion of it, we need some sacrificial wood underneath here to keep this thing above the table. And that way we can hit the last little bit of it. Sometimes you don't have a bit that's as long as the one that I've got on there. And if that happens, sometimes you have to flip this over, and you're going to end up having to use a bit that is more like this one, that the bearing is the exact same size. And then so when you bring it down here, the bearing will ride on the part that's finished, and it'll cut the portion that's on top. You've seen that bit in the neck video. So now that this is finished, there's a couple of things that happened, which I knew were going to, and it's perfect because I needed to show you this, okay? One of them was this portion of the grain was actually set in a position that was not working with the direction of the spin of the router blade. And because of that, what happened is the blade would grab the grain, and instead of cutting it, it would throw it. It would cause chip out. And that's what we got here, is chip out, okay? Now with the Orion, this is not a big deal because this all gets rounded over anyway. This disappears, right? Same with this portion. That disappears with the Orion, okay? But let's say you're doing like a Strat or something where it doesn't get rounded over. Areas like this and this, you'd say, oh my God, I ruined the wood. Nope, 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 nope. How do we fix stuff like this? Well, Bondo. You know, don't be afraid to use Bondo. So what I've done is I went ahead and I've mixed up some Bondo. And Bondo comes with a cream hardener, and it comes with a body filler. You use just a little bit of this to, you know, a much larger portion of this. You mix it together until it is, you know, thoroughly mixed, and then you apply it. This stuff sets up real fast, like within 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So you don't have much working time. Just follow the instructions on Bondo. You end up putting it in the areas that you need. You give it a once over, you look anywhere else to see where maybe the body might need Bondo. And then from here, you know, any extra that you have, just grab an old razor that you were using earlier, maybe on the neck or something, and then just scrape this stuff up, so that way you don't have to deal with a lot of sanding later on. You can also end up using this right here to fill up little holes. If you might see a little hole, you can just kind of push it in there and then scrape it up. There's no shame in using Bondo, okay? I mean, we're on this one, quite honestly, none of the chip out is ever going to even be seen because I round the edges over on an Orion. But once again, if this was something that was like on a Telecaster or something like that had a flat edge, you would have no choice to do this. If you wanted this to still be natural, like a natural finish, you can still do that. But what you would do is, after everything is said and done, you end up making this black and you kind of fade it in, right? And in my video about finishing and painting, I'll go over that. But I would say that every single major manufacturer uses Bondo because this type of stuff happens sometimes. Even when you're very careful during the time that you're routing, sometimes just the way that the grain is set up, it happens. There's ways that you can get around it. As soon as you identify the problem, you can stop, pull it out, go the opposite direction slowly, and then that will fix it, okay? So here for about 10 or 15 minutes, there's not much I can do. I have to set back and just wait for this to go ahead and dry, cure, set up. As soon as that's done, I have the option of either putting the template back on and then routing again, which will work, or what I can do is I can just sand it. And in this case, I'm just going to sand it because I really didn't need to put it on here anyway. I only did it for the sake of you guys out there to show you how you can go about doing it. So now that the Bondo has cured, what I did is I took my sander to it and I went ahead and I made this smooth. Now, on this guitar, it's not going to make a difference because this stuff gets rounded over because this is an Orion model. But now that that is taken care of, if this was your guitar and it wasn't the exact, like let's say you're going to be doing something like a Fender Strat or a Telecaster or something along those lines, you would sand the sides down to make them as smooth as you could, and then you would go ahead and use a round over bit around the outside of this. That would be the next step. Now, the Orion uses a veneered flame maple across the top. So that's going to be the next thing that I do, is I'm going to get some veneer, and I'm going to get it ready and prepped, everything like that, to glue on the top of this. And as soon as it's glued and it's set up, at that point, we can actually start rounding this over. But if yours was going to be paint grade or something, you would obviously skip this step. But what I'm going to be doing here with the veneer is something that a lot of manufacturers do. They'll use veneers instead of actual caps, simply because people like the way it looks, but a veneer is much cheaper to do than actually getting a large piece of flame maple. A piece of veneer to go across the top of this, you might spend $5, maybe $10 tops for a thin piece of veneer, where if you were actually to get a nice maple cap that had the same type of flame on it, it might cost you anywhere from $60 to $70. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of manufacturers will use veneer. Keep the price down, keep the cost down. So that's the next step. This guy is ready, basically, to have it, the veneer glued on. But before I actually end up putting the veneer on, I am going to take my sander over this with 60 or 80 grit to kind of lightly roughen up the surface, make sure everything is perfectly flat, and then that way I know for sure that glue is going to adhere very, very well. So right here I have a couple of pieces of veneer that I'm going to end up using on the Orion. I'm not worried about the dust and everything that's on this side. This is all going to end up getting cleaned off. But what I want to do is I want to look at this, and I want to move this back and forth until the flame lines up with one another. Now we've got this big tear here. I'm not overly worried about that right now, because that's going to end up getting removed. Now, when you have a lot of fine flames on a piece of veneer, sometimes it's really hard to find exactly where these guys line up. But what you can do is look at the main grain. Don't look at the flame, look at the main grain, and try to get that lined up fairly close. And then from there, look for a large portion of flame that kind of stands out from the rest, and get as close as you can to lining up. So right here, that's what I'm focusing on near this tear. Now, what I'm going to do is I want this to be very tight to one another. I almost want a perfect mirror image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure. I'm looking at this. I want to see how far that thing goes. Let's just go 1.5 inches. So I'm going to say 1.5 inches right here, and I'm going to go 1.5 inches right here. Okay, and somewhere up here where it's almost around 1.5 inches, I mean where it's still straight, I'm going to do 1.5 inches there, and I'm going to do 1.5 inches there. Now what I need to do is, I already have these guys kind of lined up, so I'm going to just draw a line like this, so after the cut's done I know roughly where I need to put these guys again. So by grabbing this, sliding it over till it touches those arrows right there and right there, okay, real close to there, getting these guys where they're almost lined up. And I can always fine-tune this a little bit later. Right there, okay? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure over about 3/4 inch. And I'm not really worried too much about up there, because the body is really not that long. This would be where the neck pocket would be anyway. Right there. And I'm going to do 3/4 inch right up here as well. Okay. And as I've mentioned in my other video or videos, one of my favorite tools is a razor blade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my straight edge here that is very straight, and I'm going to lay it over these two marks that I made at the 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to put pressure down on these. I have a brand new razor blade, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put pressure on this, and I'm going to not try to force the razor blade through both veneers at the exact same time. I want to do this in a couple of cuts, but I'm going to run this guy right down tight against a straight edge, trying not to have anything shift. Some people will use a plane for this, and then what they'll do is they'll wedge these pieces of veneer between two very straight pieces of wood, and then they'll run a plane down it. That works, but so does the razor blade, and the razor blade just seems to be a lot faster. So less work is better. So from here I'm just going to slide this up, try to be somewhat on the same line. This part's going to be removed anyway. I just don't want it to really interfere with what's happening down here. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of this piece, and the piece that's underneath it I'm going to get rid of as well. Okay. I'm not overly concerned, like I mentioned before, about what's happening up here. Okay. But what is important is that these portions down here line up, and the seam is very, very, very tight. Okay. This line right here was not correct, but now it is. Let me mark that up. But this is very tight. You can hardly see a seam when I pinch these guys together. Before I start taping this, what I want to do is I want to get an idea about where all of this is going to end up going. And the line that I have for the center of this, I'm basically lining that up with the cut. And now what I can do is I can just kind of trace around this body. Like that. Okay. And then that tells me what portions I can get rid of up here that are going to end up causing me problems. I could get a pair of scissors and cut these, but the problem is as I showed in my other video about wood, about how these have a tendency to tear almost like a zipper. What I want to do is I want to prevent that, and if I scar this and then do the exact same thing like this, it'll be less likely to tear on its weakest portion of the grain. And I'm going to do this on both sides, making sure that these guys sit nice and flush and tight, which they do. Now it is time to tape these together. Some people will use different types of tape. This is what is known as a veneering tape, and it's basically like a stamp. One side, as soon as you wet it, will become tacky, and that's what we're going to be using. And I just have an old rag right here. Okay, I don't want any water to get on this veneer right now because it'll warp. But what I want to do is I want to kind of get this a little wet right here. Get this away from the veneer. This stuff is very sensitive to moisture. And what I want to do is I want to grab pieces like about this size and just kind of hold this and pull it. Just hold and pull. Let me do it like this so you can see what I'm doing. Like that. And coming down here, grabbing the veneer, pulling it together with my fingers as a clamp. I put one side down, make sure that that's tight, and I'm going to do another one here and another one there, and then I'll do it lengthwise. Sometimes you can put the veneer tape down, let that side adhere, then pull on the tape to bring the seam over to the other seam. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece for the lengthwise, just like this, I'm not worried about what's happening here on top of the guitar because this is all going to get sanded later anyway. What's important right now is what's going on the bottom where the glue is going to be adhering to the body. And one of the good things about this type of tape is after it's on, it's almost semi-transparent, and I can see the seam and I can tell if there's any areas that need to be worked on a little bit, if I need to pull this up and then redo it. So now that we have this, I want to cut around the outside of this design here with a razor. I don't want this to be too big of a piece because if it overlaps the guitar too much, when I put this in the vacuum press, it will start cracking, and that's the last thing that I need. Now, this is an Orion, a Gelvin Orion guitar that we're building, and it's rounded over on the edges. So if a little bit cracks, it's not the end of the world, because it's going to come off anyway. Okay, but in areas like this, these are crucial, these areas. So I'm going to get a little tighter around the turns here with this razor. Now, if this was a guitar that did not have strong round over edges, you would want to get as close to this line as you could. The tighter the fit around the outside, the better the finished product will be, if you are not doing a large round over like the Orion has. And then these pieces I save, I can use these for the headstock. Now, down here has got me a little concerned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this gently and put another piece of tape right there. I don't want, as soon as glue touches this, it's going to, as soon as glue touches the veneer is going to want to bubble and warp and do all sorts of weird stuff, and it's going to expand and it's going to create bubbles, and it's going to be real nasty, and we need to avoid that. At this point, I'm going to clean off the rear of this. I don't want any dust. I want to make sure that we get good adhesion. Yeah, and you'll see that this is not perfectly flat. It's already got kind of like little bumps of where the grain is. These are going to be amplified as soon as glue touches it. So by the time that we put this on the body, you know, we're within just a minute or so, we got to get this inside the vacuum press. Now, is this something that you can do without a vacuum press? Yeah, but you should use a different glue, and it's going to take you a while, and it's going to be frustrating, and it's going to be a lot tougher. I mean, you can clamp it with, you know, another body that's identical to the one that you have on the bottom, making sure that both sides are perfectly flat, so when you clamp it down, the veneer has nowhere to go. It has to stay perfectly flat. You can also use a roller, which looks like this, which I'm going to end up using also with a vacuum press, but you can roll this and get the bubbles out. You can use a spray adhesive or contact cement. Put a layer on this side, put a layer on the body, and be very, very careful. Start at one side and kind of work your way down, and then roll it out, because when that contact cement touches the other contact cement, it's almost an instant bond, and it can be kind of tough, you know. There's a learning curve on this. So, you know, sometimes it can take up to 5 tries before you finally get the hang of it. So when you buy your veneer, make sure that you buy enough to do a few bodies, just in case you mess up the first, because you probably will. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth this out, making sure that it's perfectly flat everywhere and it's slightly rough. Now you might be asking, why would I put the veneer on before I route everything out. And the simple answer is this. This veneer is very weak. As soon as I put this on here and I start putting a vacuum on it, if there's any holes inside this, it's going to suck this veneer down, and it's going to want to break, and it's going to want to tear. It's much better to do it like this. It's just much better to have the veneer on before you start doing any routing to this guitar at all, especially parts like the outside, right? Just in case this stuff does end up wanting to break or start splitting or something like that. That part's going to come off, right? But if everything's perfect and it's ready and you put this on, if it's not done exactly right the first time, you're going to end up having to redo this a number of times, okay? But right now, I'm just double checking, making sure that we're good everywhere, and we should be fine. We might get a little bit of cracking here and there, but all of that is going to end up coming off anyway. There's one portion up here that needs to be trimmed, which is right here. That's just way too much. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my vacuum press out and set it up. And a vacuum press is nothing more than a vinyl bag. It's got a piece of MDF underneath it that's got a bunch of air channels routed out in it. And there is a vacuum hooked up to it. Now, my vacuum press is run by my compressor. And so I don't actually have to have a vacuum pump, because the way that it's designed, it will create a vacuum without a vacuum pump. But typically a vacuum press runs about $250 to $350 for a small shop. And you know, if this is going to be the only body that you're planning on doing, then you might want to just go the alternate route of using like a contact adhesive or a different glue that sets up a little bit faster, that you can just roll it. So the type of glue that I'm going to be using is Tight Bond for cold press veneering. There's other types of glues for veneering. This one seems to work best for this application. Sometimes this glue has a tendency to kind of dry up a little bit inside the bottle, and it might leave chunks, and you don't want chunks. So if you see, like I already see a couple of chunks, when you see the chunks, the first thing you want to do, get rid of them, because anything that protrudes from underneath here will show up in the veneer. Now, I've got a small roller here that I don't mind throwing away. Usually I'll do 3 or 4 bodies at a time, but in this case, obviously I'm not going to. But what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to spread this. You'll see where some of that glue had blackened. It's not chunks, so I can leave that. But this roller will ensure I guess you should say, that there is an even coat of glue all the way around the on this body. Okay, much faster than using a brush. And I don't want tons of glue, because it'll take a long time to set up, as well as it'll increase the chance of this veneer warping. So now that we have that glue on there, I'm going to take this, I'm going to line the seam up with the seam on the side right here, and I'm going to do the same thing on the front. I don't really have too much time before this veneer wants to start reacting to that glue. So I have to make sure that these guys are perfectly lined up, because this is going to become my new center line. Yes, so we're good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to slip it inside the vacuum bag, very carefully of course, making sure that the veneer does not shift any during the time that I'm sliding this in. Put it right there so you can see what's going on. I want to double check my seams. We're looking okay. And now I'm going to clamp off the bag. And then I'm going to start evacuating the air out of this bag.
When it gets close to being about where I want it, I'm going to take my roller and I'm going to try to get any bubbles out that are inside here. Because sometimes a bubble inside the actual vinyl bag will allow the veneer to pop up in that section. Just trying to get any air bubbles out now. It'll give us a nice flatter, nicer finish and end result. Now that that's done, I'm going to turn it back on and get the rest of the air out. And this will be cycling on and off for a while, but this will make sure that this is perfectly flat all the way across. I'll leave it in here for a couple of hours. Now let's say, for instance, you have a guitar body that has got shapes on it. Let's say it's an arch top, or you know, you've got an arm cut out right here or something. What you can do to make sure that the veneer does not break is, before you put it in, spray it lightly with some water, give it a second to kind of loosen up a little bit, then stick it in, and it'll have a tendency to want to bend a little bit more before it breaks. But you have to be very cautious on how much water you use, because the veneer will expand, and as soon as the thing starts drying, it starts sucking itself back in again. And when that ends up happening, sometimes it becomes too short on the outside. That's another reason why you want to do all the roundovers and everything later. But if you have an arm cutout, you don't have a choice. You have to put the veneer on after the arm cutout is done. Then you can round everything over. A thing to keep an eye on is the seam. Sometimes what ends up happening is, once again, this becomes wet, it expands, and every now and then it'll actually end up causing the veneer to push against itself and create a gap. If you take the tape off too soon, in other words, you think it's dry, you think it's set up, and you take it off too soon, when it starts actually drying, it'll start pulling that seam apart, and you'll see this line that goes straight down the center. So it's best to leave this guy inside here for a few hours, you know, just to make sure everything is set up. Don't touch anything until it's fully dry, typically overnight. And unfortunately, to do things correctly, you know, sometimes it forces you to buy tools that ordinarily you wouldn't need for anything else. Now, if another thing that you can do to avoid having to veneer and, you know, worry about the thing warping and twisting and popping up and everything, because this stuff is pretty thin, what you can do is just get a thicker piece. You know, get something that's 1/8 of an inch or something. Then you don't have to worry about it. You can just clamp it down with another piece of wood that's shaped the same as the guitar, as long as it's thick and it won't shift, it won't bend.
So it's been a few hours and I'm getting ready to close up shop here, so I'm going to go ahead and take the vacuum out of the bag here and let this set overnight, so that way it can lose some of the moisture that seeped through from the glue. So let's go ahead and let's get back to business here. So this piece has cured. It's nice and dry, it's perfectly flat, everything's nice. We have a little bit of overlap, and that's okay around the outside. But I want to show you a couple things. We can flip this over. What's important to also keep in mind is, anytime that you have a finished side like we have down there, you want to have your workspace free of any large pieces of anything. Even small little chunks of wood or something like that can dent it, okay? And it'll leave a mark. So that's not good. So what we can do is we can put this on here, and I'm not going to use double stick tape at this time. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to bring this over to the edge of the table, and I'm going to clamp it in 2 spots. And that way I know this guy is not going to move. I don't have to use double stick tape, and I can route out what I need to route out. And then from here, this gets routed out 5/8 of an inch. And I'm going to be going back and forth. I'm going to do this and this, and then we'll go back and this and this. And after this is 5/8, I'm only going to focus on this. So these are both cut to 5/8 of an inch deep, and I can remove the template now, and I can just go by what I've already routed to complete
what I need to complete. Now, sometimes when you have to take a lot of material out, if you want to kind of help your router bits out a bit, what you want to do is, in areas like this, take a large Forstner bit, maybe something like this, okay? Take it to the drill press, let this do the majority of the work to take a lot of that wood out, so that way it takes it easy on your drill bits, your router bits. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to continue just routing this and routing this and routing this until I get maybe a quarter of an inch away from the base, the top of the guitar body, and then that way I can come back in and kind of fine tune that a little bit later on down the line. Also right now, if I wanted to, I could come in with the bit that I was talking about earlier, where I can just kind of run this around the outside of this at about 1/8 of an inch deep and put that lip on if I wanted. Let's talk a little bit about that belly cutout. Okay, so right here on a lot of guitars we'd have a belly cutout, and the belly cutout basically starts right around here. There's no really given set of rules that's absolutely 100% accurate, but basically you would end up having something that is like this, okay, somewhere in that area, and that has to be cut out. Well, how much do you cut out? Completely dependent upon you and your specs, what you want. There's some people that don't like belly cutouts, and there's others that say just give me a very, very small one. Some people want one that is much larger than this, okay? But the way that the belly cutout gets done is exactly the same way that we did the neck. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to clamp the body down, and I've got my handy dandy draw knife. And my draw knife, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to start whittling away at this. Okay, now you see that right here it started to split when I kind of started pulling up on it. What that does is it tells me I need to start coming in from this side now. Okay, and you're going to be taking some from each side and reversing it. A little bit here, a little bit there. Okay, now this is one way that you can do it if you don't have a lot of fancy tools and you just kind of like working with wood and you like seeing it come off and whatnot. I personally don't have the time for this anymore. So another way you can do it is if you have a large enough bandsaw, you can cut a huge chunk of this out. Okay, that's another way. Or if you just want to, get down and dirty, you take a belt sander to the side of this, back and forth, and get the majority out, which that's what we're going to do on this one. So now I'm just going to take a belt sander back and forth to this, and I'm going to be kind of shifting it all over the place to kind of get the rough shape that I want. So now that I've got a lot of that off, what I want to do is I'm going to come in now with my draw knife again, and I'm going to try to kind of straighten some of this stuff out. And what I mean by straighten is take any humps out of this, look down the side of this right here and make sure that it looks flowing. Now you can also use wood rasps or anything else that you want that will take off a large chunk of wood all at once. Okay? There's really no right or no wrong on this. It's just whatever works. So now that we have a lot of that roughed out, I'm going to come in with my orbital sander and try to even everything out. Now this is what I'm talking about as far as evening it out. I mean, if we look down this is not a flowing line at all, right? So what we need to do is we need to kind of make this look flowing, and we can do it with the sander, we can do it with a draw knife, we can do it with a spoke shave, we can do it any way that we need to do it. But the reality is, at the end of the day, this has got to look flowing. This has got to look nice and neat, because if not, it's going to look like it's too handmade and it's going to upset the customer. So with just a little bit more sanding, I was able to get this to look like it was flowing a lot more. Looking at it, it wouldn't hurt for me to hit this section just a touch more, like right there, but then it'll look really nice from the top view. So now that the belly cut is done, the Orion does not have an arm cutout. Now if you were going to do an arm cutout, you do it the exact same way as you did the belly cutout. There's no difference between that. But the Orion does have a huge roundover around the outside. And ordinarily, I would put my template down and I'd route out my pickups and all that other stuff before I did that. But because I have this seam that tells me what's dead center, I'm not worried about it. I can still have everything perfectly lined up even with the roundovers on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the roundover now. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my roundover. And you'll notice that when I do this, I'm going to be starting in certain areas, kind of bringing it around, only working in one direction. Because once again, this is a huge bit. And if you do it incorrectly, it'll tear up the wood, it'll grab the wood, it'll want to throw the wood, it can want to suck your hand in. I can't emphasize this enough. Know how to use your tools before you start using them. Use the proper safety gear. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing. This is no joke. This is the type of stuff that can make you lose a limb. Well, not necessarily a limb, but it can make you lose a finger or something. So now we've got that roundover that everybody is familiar with when it comes to the Orion. Now some of this I'm still going to end up having to sand and whatnot. Areas like this I'm not worried about because this is all going to get cut out when I end up notching out for my neck and also when I end up doing my pickups. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to be marking the area where I'm going to be putting my switch for my pattern, my jig that I showed you earlier. You can see that I've got a mark here. I'm also going to be marking where these holes go. This is for the kill switch, which I always drill out the kill switch after the guitar has been clear coated because it's such a large hole that a lot of times when I'm trying to actually buff, it'll kind of tear into that clear coat a little bit, and I don't want that. But we've got some holes here, and I'm going to take these to the drill press and I'm going to drill these guys out. Now this is a jig that I ended up making to make that slot for a 5-way switch. And you have to get a very, very fine router bit. This is a 1/16 of an inch router bit, okay? Now this jig, you'll see that I have a notch in it. This is part of the form of the body. This is a center line. So if I put this on the body and I match it up to the center line, this automatically takes me to the right location that I need to route. And in this particular case, I made this to accommodate this router, this router. So if I have this set here, all I got to do is just drag it like that, and it cuts a perfectly straight line. But you're going to see that when it comes to the majority of guitar building, that 90% of it is sanding and finishing. The actual building of it, except for the neck, we're talking just bodies here. The actual build of it is maybe only 5 to 10%, and a lot of it is measurements and planning. The rest of it, it's just you're going to be doing tons and tons of sanding and tons of measurements, and building jigs like this not only make sure that it's a perfectly straight and even perfect size, hole or line or whatever, but it also makes it where you can be consistent, throughout the entire process of your guitar making. I could use double stick tape, but anytime I can use a clamp instead of double stick tape, I find it just to be a lot easier for me, and it's not as wasteful. It also holds a lot better. And 2 clamps right here will be satisfactory. This won't shift any. Now I've got this set up so that way when I come in here like this, I can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, you won't be able to see what I'm doing unless I move the camera. So when I set this inside here, I'll be able to see exactly what is going on with this blade, with this bit. And I'm going to lock this in place right here by wedging it against this side and this side. I'm going to turn this on and slowly drop it in. And now I'm going to drag this. And I do it again. And that gives me that perfect slot that is so difficult to do in any other way. Now as far as the holes go, the holes are generally about 1 5/8 inches apart from one another depending on the brand that you use. I can drill those a little bit later. Some people might be tempted to use a Dremel to do this. I wouldn't recommend it. Dremels have a tendency to wobble and walk a lot and not really cut as cleanly as something like this. Now you can use a large router, you're just going to have to build a different jig for it. So now that that's been done, I'm going to go ahead and continue routing out the rest of this until I can see that slot that I just did. So now that I can actually see this and I've got the measurements right, this portion is good and I don't have to go any deeper. If I went any deeper, it would start weakening this out significantly, and I don't want to do that. So I'm swapping out bits right now so that way I can put a lip on there for my cavity cover. And so now I'm going to just use the basic roundover bit to go around the outside of this. So now that the roundover has been done, it's left a little bit of fuzz here and there, but we also have a very sharp edge right here. We got to knock this down by hand. Or we can also end up just using a sander. We got some 80 grit. And I'm going to start working on this edge right here so it's not so sharp and it has more of a gradual continuation from the roundover. And this fuzz that's on here from the wood fibers, I'm going to try to sand down as much as I can, but later on I can end up using my primer or a grain filler to kind of fix that. You can even use Bondo. This also gives me an opportunity to kind of fine-tune this belly cutout anywhere that might look a little strange. Just because something's made by hand shouldn't look like it is made by hand, you know. But I'm going to keep working on this, and then as soon as this is done, I'm going to go ahead and route out the pickups. So here's an example of a OGS type body. This is the same shape that I use also for my one-piece guitars, but this is going to be for either a bolt-on or a set neck. This was some just spare wood that I'm trying to utilize. This is very close to being a one solid piece of wood here, but I had to glue a piece from here up on both sides. But this is mahogany and there's nothing wrong with it. It's usable and I can make a good body out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this on here, lining everything up, and even though this has already been rounded, it's okay. It's okay that this has already been rounded. And I need to find center of this, and I'm doing it by both visual and touch. I'm basically going to end up drawing a couple lines right here, these arrow marks. Taking my straight edge
running it straight down the center of this, so I have my center line again. Okay. After I route, this line will still be here. Put a couple pieces of double stick tape on here. You want enough that it will stick, but you don't want so much that you have a really hard time removing the template from the body either. Okay, that should be centered. This won't shift. Okay, and in this particular case, I'm not going to worry so much about the bridge because I don't know if I'm going to put a Floyd in this or if I'm going to put a hardtail, but I do want the pickups to be routed. And this is exactly what you're going to be doing with all of your bodies. You know, you're going to end up doing your pickup cavities. If you don't know what you're going to do for the bridge, you just leave it alone. If you do know, then you'll end up using templates also for the Floyd rose. And to give you an example of something like that, this is a template also for something along these lines. And you'll see that I've already got this routed out for the block, and I've also got where the posts belong. It's ready. The only thing that is not there is the recess, if I decide to put the recess inside of it. Once again, you get this type of information from my first video about building templates. But if this body was going to be a Floyd rose type setup, or something that uses a fender type trim system, anything that's got that block, I would end up routing this out, this portion, at the same time as I ended up doing my pickups. These posts, the posts come in different sizes, so you have to know what kind of bridge that you're using to determine what size and what distance they use. But once again, all of this goes into my first video about building templates. Everything is being built off the templates. But I would be routing this out. Right now I don't know if I'm going to be using this body for that. So how deep are we supposed to go? Well, you need to know your pickups, right? And what we can do is we can take a measurement of the pickup like this from top to bottom, come up with our number, and say that's exactly how deep we want this to be. And granted, this pickup is not going to be sitting perfectly flush to the body, but you want this pickup to have room to move back and forth within the body. And when you put your pickup ring on side there, usually the screws extend beyond the pickup just slightly. But what this will do is it make sure that it's a good depth, and almost any type of pickup you decide to put in there will fit. But you need to know what size pickups that you're planning on using. Some people, if you're going to be doing it where it's attached directly to the body, once again, you're going to have to know your neck back angle. You're going to have to measure that. You're going to have to come up with how far the string's going to be setting off the body. And if you don't know how far the strings are going to be setting off the body, then you're not going to be able to route this to the correct depth if you want this to be attached directly to the body without a pickup ring. Okay, and what some people will do is, because I've done it, is they'll get as close as they think it'll be, and if the pickup cavity is too deep, they'll just simply put metal washers underneath this to raise it up until it's the right height, and then they'll screw it down. And if it's not high, and if it's too high, then what they'll do is they'll just route out a little bit more. But once again, you can do that on your template page. Just do a side view of the guitar, do a side view of the template, get your numbers, and it'll tell you. Okay, so once again, using the same kind of bit that I have been using, and this one's kind of old and it needs to be sharpened. Okay, I'm going to be routing this out to 3/4 of an inch deep. You don't want to go too deep on these. Simply because if you do put a Floyd rose inside here and you have that back channel where the springs go, what's going to end up happening is sometimes this becomes too thin and you'll actually go right through it and you'll have this hole. You have to make sure that you're keeping all of these measurements and depths in mind during the time that you're building your guitar, because there's nothing worse than spending a lot of money on a nice piece of wood and then
you make a mistake with your router or your measurements, and the next thing you know, you've got a big chunk or a big hole out of it. You also want to make sure that your router bits are very, very tight, because if they're loose, sometimes they can actually start going. They start coming out of the router, start digging deeper, create bad cuts. Sometimes they break and they fly off. Make sure they're very, very tight. So from here, we're good. I'm going to mark center once again here, just to make sure, even though I've got that center line. I'm also going to mark the sides of where the neck goes, and I can remove this. Okay. This is my 25.5 inch mark right here. So I'm going to take a measurement from there to there. Okay. Place it right here, make a line, and once again, using a square, following the center line, because everything is based on the center. It's like Wing Chun. Okay, I'm going to draw my line, have it extend, and do the exact same thing on this side so it continues all the way through. What I do is I have an old Fender base plate, and I use this as my template for all my hole drilling, because they've already got this stuff perfectly spaced out and drilled to the correct size. And what I would do is, let me get my, here's an old bridge that I will often use to do my measurements, and this has already been set halfway. These two guys on the far end, they've already been set halfway. And so what I want to do is I want to line this up center, okay? And I know it's center because dead center of the D and the G, there's a line right here, okay? And there's also a hole back here for drilling into the screw. So what I do is I take this and I line these guys up, and I put it about right there, okay? And I go a little bit beyond the 25.5 mark, because generally the low E will want to go further back than 25.5 inches, and then the high E will want to go forward a little bit more. It can be up to 1/8 depending on your guitar. But what I want to do is I want this to give me plenty of room for adjusting and not make it where I have to take these springs out. So right here is basically where my bridge will be setting. Okay, I go around, kind of draw a little thing here so it helps me stay where I belong. Now you can come inside here with your pencil and draw lines, draw circles like this if you want. It's not really accurate. It's usually better to use what's known as a hinge bit. And a hinge bit basically is a spring-loaded bit that you put on your drill, and it sets inside this portion of the hole, and it guides the bit where it's always perfectly center. Okay, but you don't have to use a hinge bit. You can just go like this, and it will also help you out. But from here, what I want to do is, right here is where those strings are going to be coming up through, and if you look straight down, you can see them. So what I do is I mark where the center is of these guys right here. Okay, same thing. I come over, I take a measurement, I come over, I mark it. Draw a line. And now, and you'll see on my template I have a line that I've already drawn right here for center. But what I end up doing is I end up taking this and I slide this until that's on center. This hole right here is center, and I can see the line that I just drew in the center of these holes. Okay, that tells me this is exactly where I need to draw those holes. Once again, you can take your pencil if you want to and draw your holes like this. It's not super accurate, but it'll give you the spacing. Another thing that you can do is, if you don't have a base plate like this, Okay, you can draw the first and the second. Just take the saddles out of your bridge, draw the first two, and then you end up taking a measurement from outside to outside like this. Okay, and whatever that measurement is, that's your center as well. Find center, and you just start going across like that until you have each one of these marked. Now, what's good about having this, what's good about having a base plate like this, like a spare one you can get off of any old cheap guitar or buy one on eBay or something, is after you have your bit, the bit will want to follow that, right? Because you can stick it in there and it'll drill the perfect size, it'll follow it, and you just put a piece of double stick tape down to hold this in place while you're drilling. And I would recommend using a drill press when doing this. You know, you can do it by hand, but what's going to end up happening is up here it might look nice, but on the bottom it's not going to be straight. And that's one of the major problems with a lot of people that try to do this. You can see that their ferrules in the back they're not in line. Like, you know, one might be here, one might be here, one might be there. It's like it looks really bad and they're not evenly spaced. And it's because they probably did it by hand or they weren't drilling correctly. When you're drilling this on a drill press, what you once again, you want to use a brad point. This is not a brad point, but what you want to use is a brad point. You go through, you go maybe a 1/4 inch, you pull up. You go maybe a 1/4 inch, you pull up. You go a 1/4 inch, you pull up. And you keep doing that over and over, and it ensures a very, very straight line. And what you want to do is, once again, outside to outside, and you want to stop before you go all the way through your body. Okay, you want to stop before you go all the way through your body. And I'm going to show you why here in a second. So let's say that we ended up drilling those, okay? You'll see where the brad point wanted to come out. Let's just say maybe here and here, let's just say, okay? And you'll know because it's going to look like it didn't come all the way through. It's going to look almost like a little splinter or a very, very, very small hole, because you literally want to stop before you come through, but you want that brad point to slightly protrude so you can see where it is. As soon as you can see those two, okay, you draw your line between them. You take your template, just like this, you line those two centers up where you see those two holes, okay? And once again, this is where you're going to end up actually doing your drilling. You don't drill all the way through, you drill most of the way through, okay? Turn it over, and then you end up doing this, because now this will be evenly spaced, it'll look really nice, everything will be just right. And you can do that with each hole, so that way you can actually see where they're kind of poking out on each one, okay? And if you did a very good job coming through the top on the drill press, and you did a really good job on it, they'll all be very, very close to being in line, okay? They'll be really close. But those little points will also help the new bit that is much larger for your ferrule, and depends on the size of the ferrule, have a guide, because it'll go in, it'll kind of grab, and then it'll drill the bigger holes, and they'll all be in perfect line, and they'll all be evenly spaced. And you know, that's that. You've got to be real careful when you're doing this, because this is a major mess up. I see this so often, even professional luthiers and store-bought stuff. I see where these things are not in line. And if you have just something as simple as this as your template, and you think about what you're doing, you can always make it look like a CNC machine did it, where it's just absolutely perfect. But thin bits, small bits, have a tendency to wobble, and they want to walk. So, you know, you might start, let me get a pen. So let's say that this is the top of the guitar, okay, and this is the bottom. And you might be coming in perfectly straight like this. But under tension, this bit is going to want to bend like this. And when it does, it's going to start kind of wanting to walk and wobble. So at first this might come in like this, but then it might do something like that by the time it comes out. And on the next one, it might do that and go like this. And on the next one, it might be like this. And this is one of the reasons why on the rear of this,
you know, when you see those little things pop out because you've almost drilled all the way through, you might end up seeing one here, and let me draw the line so you can see it really well. Okay. You might see one here where it looks like it's exactly where it's supposed to be. You might see another one that is just a hair off. This one might be closer to that than it should be. This one might be dead on. This one might be up here, and something like that. So even though you did it quarter, 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 it was still bending. And you also don't want to use a lot of force when you're going through with the drill press either, because that will want to increase the amount of bend that is in the bit. And by going through slowly in small increments, it helps eliminate that. You have these little guys just barely poking out because it's just a brad point. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So on a brad point, you'll see that the brad actually sticks out further than what is actually being cut, okay? So you only want the very, very, very tip of this to come through, and you see that it's going to give you about a 1/16 of an inch of wood or so that will still be left over, that you didn't cut all the way through, you didn't drill all the way through. You just want this point to come out. That's it, just barely any right there. But after you can see that, and you draw your line between point A and point B, so that way that these are lined up, you can come and say, I'm going to start on this line, but I know that, like let's say in this case, where it's slightly off its line, you don't start in that hole, you start next to it, you know, right there. And you know that you're centered at least this direction, but you're in a straight line at this point. Something that's far off this way, you do the exact same thing. You end up finding center and you go there anyway. But at least you know where the holes are. And if you're using a brad, it will want to follow the brad. It will want to follow this hole as well, okay? But this brad, when it grabs, it will definitely, and using a drill press, it'll definitely want to go a lot straighter this way, okay, following the bit more so than the hole. And also, if this is held down very, very well on the drill press, this won't shift. A bit this big will not want to bend as much as a small bit. Now, the reason why I haven't drilled this is because, like I said before, I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing a you know, a trim on this, or if I'm going to be doing a hardtail bridge. So I'm just going to leave it as this. This part has already been marked out, so if I do decide to do it, then fantastic. But let's go ahead and say that we're going to be doing a Floyd Rose type. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, now this is set for a different scale length, so the pickups are not going to line up, okay? Well, they kind of do. But once again, I could set this here, and now I would route this out, okay? And I'd go almost all the way through the guitar, but I wouldn't go all the way through on a Floyd Rose because this portion doesn't go all the way through from here over, okay? This is only here to accommodate the trim arm that's right here. That's the only reason why that's there, is just to accommodate that, okay? So when this sets inside there, boom. So only this basically only gets down to maybe an inch, okay? And then you stop. But this, on the other hand, does go through all the way. This gets drilled. We would mark this where we need to put our posts. And it's very important that you put your posts exactly on the money where they need to be. Dead center, right? Do not get a pencil, just go like this, and drill. Because if you do, you're going to end up with a Floyd Rose that's like this or something like that. They have to be dead on. And it doesn't hurt to measure after you have this marked out. It doesn't hurt to measure from center over, going by your template, making sure that the distance is correct. It doesn't hurt to measure from the 25.5 inch mark, which, if from what I recall, is right here. Okay, no, this is 20. This is 25 and an eighth, or 25 and a quarter. This line, I can't completely remember, but on your template there'll be a 25.5 line, and then you're going to end up having your Floyd Rose or whatever brand of bridge that's on there show the markings.
you can measure from one of those to make sure you also have the proper distance from the 25.5 to the center here, okay? But you would drill this, not drill this out, you would end up routing this out. After that's routed out, and you can go down maybe 3/4 of the way, okay, on this. And what you do is you just take a drill bit and you drill here and you drill here, you go all the way through. So when you turn it over, you know exactly where you need to start routing some stuff out. You know where the center is. But we're going to talk about that here in a second. So after that's routed out, you would have another template that you ended up building. And this one, I've got lines. This line right here tells me where the center of those posts are. And so for the sake of argument, let's just say that it's right here, okay? And then I would line this up from center to center, and I would route this out to however deep I need it to be. And once again, this is preference. Generally, you're going to be looking at about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. I've seen some people do it almost a 1/2 inch deep, okay? But this is the top portion to route out with the template. One of the things to keep in mind is when you're using the template bits that I have been talking about in a lot of these videos, those are about 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch wide. And it creates a curve right here in areas like this. The Floyd Rose is typically not perfectly curved in areas like that. And what you'll have to do is after this is gone, you'll have to take a chisel and kind of square off those curves, okay? That's if you're planning on doing a Floyd Rose type. But let's look at the rear of this if we're going to be doing the Floyd Rose type. So we've routed this out. We've got a couple of drill holes down it, okay? We flip it over. Now this is for a Orion guitar, but we can still use this for what we're doing, okay? In fact, this has got a center line already on it because this is from the template video as well, okay? So we can line this guy up. Let's just say that we're lined up. Everything is grand. This is the correct guitar that we're using for it. Everything's lined up. Boom. Now we can go ahead and route this out. And we would end up seeing the drill hole from the top edge somewhere in this area, okay? But we can start routing this out, and depending on the bridge type and the size of springs and everything, you route this out to the depth that it's supposed to be. Generally, it's around 5/8 of an inch, okay? Same thing goes for the rear cavity. Now the routing is all the same, and I know it seems like I'm doing more talking than actual working, but there's more important things to talk about and show than just me routing out holes, because the routing out of this and of this and of the Floyd and all that other stuff is exactly the same as the pickups. Nothing has changed. Everything is based off your template. And if you ended up routing your template correctly and you had your measurements done correctly on your template, then you have no worries. But in this case, let's say on this particular guitar, I decided that maybe right here is where I'm going to be putting my rear cavity, okay? Let's say, and I end up routing this out. And when I route this out, I want to stop where I've got at least 1/8 of an inch of material down there, right? Because if it's too thin, what will end up happening is as soon as you start putting your electronics and everything up in this area, I don't even know where I'm going to be putting things on this. That's why I'm not routing it out either. But if it's too thin, it becomes flimsy. It'll want to crack. It'll want to break. It's just not good. But if it's too thick and you have a 5-way switch, the 5-way switch will want to hit the wood and it won't go into the far positions, okay? So let me show you an example of what I'm talking about with that. Here's a great example. I was teaching, this is a destroyed piece of, this is a destroyed guitar basically. This is something that I was teaching an apprentice how to do it, and their first time doing it, they messed up. This is alder, and there's a lot of stuff wrong with it. Can I save this? Actually, I could. I could run this through a planer, put a cap on top of it, and then start anew if I wanted. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We've got the holes drilled. You want to drill the holes, okay, for your cavity. All of your electronics, you want to drill those before you actually end up routing the stuff out, okay? But we can see here in this section with what I was just talking about right now, As far as you'd have your holes drilled, from here you end up drilling this out about 5/8 of an inch or so. And then this section right here is actually a little bit lower. And this is so when you do dives and stuff, the block has a little bit more room to move back here and it doesn't hit anything. But it only needs to go maybe like an extra 1/4 of an inch or something, not too much. But you can see this is ultimately would be very similar to the end result. You drill where you want your electronics. This guy would sit on here, okay, just like that. And then you can go ahead and start routing, and now you have confidence in knowing that this cavity is in the right spot. But if you did your templates correct, then it will be. And let's talk about the thickness. Let me show you the thickness that I was mentioning a little bit earlier. So we'll go back to this guitar. We have these routed out, drilled out. We have this cut, okay? And if we flip it over, if I can hold this in a fashion that you can actually see the thickness, this is a little bit more than an 1/8. This is about 3/16 of an inch. Because of the type of switch, the pots that I'm actually going to be using in this, they're a little bit longer. And so it gives me a little bit more room to have some meat right here. But this section, I had to route out a little bit more for the switch, because if not, the switch I wouldn't be able to go in the far position on either side. And so this has to be a little bit thinner. This is almost an 1/8 of an inch. It's not quite, but it's almost. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out the back angle. And this piece, this Orion body has already been routed out, and it's ready to roll, and it's getting ready to go to be sprayed with primer. This section right here is only roughly done for the neck pocket. I still need to route out a back angle on it. And the way that I do it is I built a special jig to do that. And instead of showing you the jig, which will probably just end up confusing you, let me show you a way that you can do it without having the jig. So what you can do is just end up getting 3 pieces of wood that are all the same size and lay it next to or on top of or right on the line of the neck pocket. Now if you were to take a router right now and route this, it would make this flat, okay? So you take a 3rd piece and then you stick that up and under back here, okay? Now the further away this is from the neck pocket, the less of the angle this will be back here. But the closer it is, okay, the greater of an angle there will be. Now depending on the type of guitar that you're building, the shape of it, this side might be sitting lower than this side, and then that's bad. So what you'd have to do is maybe put a level on this and see exactly, you move this back and forth until it's level, and then you stick a shim underneath this side to make sure that these two guys are perfectly flat with one another. You don't want this to be cockeyed or anything. You want it to be parallel to the surface of the top of the guitar. But like this, it would give you a back angle when you route, and when you stick your neck in there, it'll automatically be at the proper back angle that you've determined. Now, how do you determine the proper back angle? Your back angle is completely dependent upon your bridge, what kind of bridge you're going to use. And I'm going to show you a side view here in a second, but I want to show you a couple of old bridges. And this also holds true with like tunamatics and stuff like that. But this is something that you might see like on a typical Fender type Strat or something. This is an old bridge too. You might see something along these lines. And you'll notice that when you look down the side of this, that there's adjusting screws right here, right? That adjust the height to adjust the action. And what you want to do is you want to set these guys where they're about halfway. In other words, halfway up, halfway down, somewhere in the middle. You don't want them to be having pieces stick out like these screws right here. That's the last thing you want. You want these guys to be halfway up, half down. And from there, you need to determine if this is going to be a countersunk bridge or if it's going to rest right on top of the guitar. If it's going to rest on top of the guitar, you take a measurement from the bottom of the plate here where it's going to be sitting on top of the guitar to the top of the saddle, right where the string rests. Okay, you take that measurement. That's the first.
after you've set the screws. On something like this Floyd Rose that came out of an old Ibanez, you do the same thing. Measure from here to the top of the saddle right there where the string rests. Once again, you ask yourself, is this going to be a Floyd that sets on top of the guitar, or is it going to be one that's countersunk? Usually what determines that is going to be the size of the block, but you can always get different block sizes. As soon as you know the distance, you're good. What about a tune-o-matic? You do the same thing. You look at the post, you look at the adjustment screw, you determine about how high up you want this off the guitar. You want to make sure you have at least a 1/4 inch play going both ways, right? Something along those lines, from the bottom to the top. And you'll end up with something like this. You might end up with a measurement that's only like that. With a tune-o-matic, on the other hand, you might end up with something like this. Okay? And on the Floyd and the Strat, you're going to get something really, really similar. Okay? But looking at this, let's say that this is our tune-o-matic, this is our Strat, and this is our Floyd height. Okay? So this is basically where the body is, and this is where the string would go. Looking at this, it should tell you why on Les Paul type guitars the back angle has to be so much more. Okay? It's because of the bridge, right? It's simply because of the bridge. And what you can do is, on a side view, okay, let's say that this is perfectly flat, and you draw three feet, whatever, and you can do this on the board of your template if you want, that you did your template on, which I go over in the first video. And what you do is, after you get your measurements and you know exactly where, like let's say that you ended up saying that this is going to be, well, if this is going to be like a Les Paul, let's say that you say this is going to be 24 3/4, even though that these bridges are slightly set at an angle. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, this is 24 3/4. What you would do is, after you take your measurements, like I mentioned right now, from the side, including the posts, right? Everything that you need to make sure that it's going to be set exactly where you want it. Middle ground. So you can adjust it down and you can adjust it up. Okay? So in other words, right here would be the adjustment screw. Maybe like right here would be the actual adjuster. And you give yourself a little bit of room. Okay? So you can adjust this thing up and down. Okay? That's what I'm talking about with this. You don't want this to be perfectly flat against a thing where you can only adjust it up. You want to be able to move this so you can adjust your action height and intonation well. From here, you end up drawing a perfectly straight line between there and where the nut would set. Let's just say that this is where the nut is, right here, okay? And then, so that way the distance between the inside of this nut and the center of this, where the string is going to rest, your 24 3/4, okay, is perfect. And you also have to know the height of the nut. Well, how do you know how tall the nut is? Well, it's going to be determined by the fretboard thickness, which you have to know what you're going to be having, plus the fret height. Okay? But as soon as you have this, and it's close to that, okay, it doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be pretty close, and you draw a line. I know this, it sounds like a lot of stuff here. You draw a line from the frets over, as long as you know what the perfect height of this is. Then you give yourself a little extra room, and then you know that that can be the height of your nut. Keep in mind that this neck right here, this is an abstract neck. This does not exist. This is a perfectly flat line running from the top of the neck, not counting the fretboard, to the body. Okay, think of it like that. And then you add the fretboard, and then you add the frets. That gives you a little bit of height. Okay. Now what we have to do is we have to figure out what kind of angle are we going to be putting on this. So you draw your perfectly straight line, and the distance from here to here, and what happens is you're going to see that this creates an angle. Okay, and this particular angle we want to kind of mimic. We don't want this to be perfectly flat right here, because if this is perfectly flat, the action height in this area is going to be ridiculous, right? So what we need to do is we need to get this neck and put a back angle on it, and what it does is it forces this neck to get closer to the strings, and you'd want to have more of an equal distance, something like this, right? Not down here, but something closer to that. And you'll notice that the angle that's here is the angle that's currently on the string that we've drawn. Now from here, you can actually end up taking like a gauge, set it there, and it'll tell you what the degrees are that you have to put on the neck pocket. So if this is the neck pocket and it's usually flat, you would end up routing it at that angle, okay, to match what would be there. Generally, things like Gibsons, you're dealing with about 2 degrees, somewhere between 2 and 3 degrees. Things like Fenders and Ibanez and other bolt-on necks, you don't have to worry about so much because you can always shim the neck. If it's a set neck, you can't, okay? And you usually will be dealing with anywhere from about 3/4 of a degree to 1 degree or so, give or take. But it just depends on the bridge and if it's going to be sitting on top of the body or if it's going to be countersunk. If it is going to be countersunk, you have to take that into account. So let's say this section up here is where a Floyd Rose is going to be sitting, and then this is how much has actually been taken out for the Floyd Rose to set, and this is where the base would go through the block. And the Floyd would actually set inside this routed section here, and this would be our adjusters and here would be our saddles, okay? You have to take into account for how deep you want this thing to set, okay, before you can actually end up drawing your lines and stuff. Now if I were to put strings on this right now, okay, the string angle would be really close to about what's right here. I could probably get away with that with this being flat, okay? I could probably get away with it. But let's say that it's not this. Let's say it's something that's much larger. Like let's say it's something like a tunematic bridge, okay? And it'd be like this. The action right here would be ridiculously too high, okay? So what we can do is we can actually just start moving the neck until it's about right, like this, and say, okay, making sure that this is touching the top of your tunematic bridge, and then the lower end right here is touching the top of the nut. And keeping the distance between the bottom of this and the fretboard, including the frets, because you have to consider the frets, the same. And you can kind of move this, look at the side down here where this little gap is going to be created, and say this is how much, this is what I kind of need to take off. And you can take a pencil and say, okay, so that's about the angle I should use. So once again, when it comes to the back angle, there is no secret number or anything. It's based on the bridge that you're using. It's based on the scale length that you're doing. It's based on the size of the fret wire. It's based on the thickness of the fretboard. It's based on a lot of different things. And you can't just give a generic number. But if you have a flat body, this is the side of the body, okay? You have a bridge that's right here, okay? And this is where your neck is. I'm going to draw a flat neck first, okay? Let's say that this is the nut right here, and I end up drawing a line from point A to point B. You're going to see that the action right here is entirely too large. So what we do is we compensate for that by putting a back angle on the neck. And now it is the same distance. Pretty much. It grows a little bit up here, but it's not a huge gap. Okay, it compensates. And if you don't do this, it forces you to lower that bridge and lower that bridge and lower that bridge and lower that bridge until it's all the way near the bottom of the guitar. So that way you can get good action. And then once again, the angle in which you need to route out is determined by this. This is probably going to be the easiest way for you to do it, as I explained earlier. So that way you can come in here and say, well, I need to take that much out. And then as soon as that part is out and it's at the proper angle, when this neck is set inside there, it's at the perfect angle for it, okay? If it's a bolt-on neck, you don't have to worry about it because you can just put a shim right here when you bolt your neck on, and that will compensate for the neck back angle. So here's an example of a back angle that would be on my JG 3.0.
Now, since this is an OGS build and I have these guys tied together running down the center here, what I have to do is I created a jig that I can run the router and the router actually is set at the proper angle all the way down it. But if we turn this, you'll see that the distance between here and here is larger than the distance between here and here. I have a very slight back angle, and what that does is, by me placing a straight edge on this, let me move this so you can kind of see this right here. When I turn this, you should be able to see that there's a gap between the body and the straight edge right there. It's a slight gap, and that compensates for the small difference with a bridge, because the bridge is countersunk on the JG 3.0 for the Floyd Rose. Okay, so since it's slightly lower, I don't have to have a strong back angle. If it was sitting on top of the guitar, on the other hand, I'd have to increase the back angle to this. So at the end of the day, guys, that's pretty much just how guitar bodies are built. You know, anybody can do it as long as you have, you know, some tools, as long as you have a good design that you've already worked out, you've done your templates and everything like that. You know, you're careful about doing certain things, careful with your seams, you know, careful using the right drill bits, careful using the right router bits and stuff like that. When doing roundovers, you know, I can do it with the router, but when you start getting up in areas like this, it can become kind of dangerous to your wood, because the router really has nothing to set on. And so sometimes using like a router table is a much better idea because it stays more consistent. You know, we've talked about veneering, we've talked about the gluing of these guys and clamping them together. We've talked about, you know, drilling, doing the cavities, making the lip for the cavity cover. We've talked about, you know, the depths of the pickups. We've talked about the back angle. We've talked about a couple of different bridges. You know, you should have everything that you need now for building your own body. You should know exactly how to do it. From this point, everything is just sanding now, trying to make everything look as nice as you possibly can, because your finished guitar, when you decide to go ahead and clear coat it, any imperfection that is on it now before it's finished will show up in the finish. So you have to spend a long time sanding, taking out any burn marks from any tools, taking out any scratches, any strange little tool marks. It's just tons and tons and tons of sanding. You know, look at the guitar from multiple angles. Make sure that your lines look nice and flowing. You know, everything about your guitar, the end result is going to be based on what you did during the time that you were building your guitar body. Okay. Also keep in mind, sometimes errors happen, sometimes mistakes happen, sometimes tools break, sometimes router bits act a little funny and take chunks out. Sometimes all sorts of stuff can happen, and at the end of the day, it's just a piece of wood, right? Don't get too upset from it. Just, you know, learn from your mistakes, slow down, think of how you could have prevented it, and in the future you won't have the same problem again. Also remember, Bondo is your friend. If it is a paint grade body, don't worry about if you have to use Bondo here and there. Every professional guitar manufacturer uses body filler. It just comes with the trade. Some people don't like thinking about that because they're like, oh my God, it's going to affect the tone. It doesn't affect anything. It just makes the finish look a lot better. So that's how you go about doing guitar bodies. Now, during the time that you're watching any of these videos, if there's something that wasn't quite clear or you need a little bit more information on it, feel free to contact me at Gelvin Guitars and ask me, you know, the question pertaining to the video to clarify. I don't mind spending a few minutes and trying to explain something a little bit better if it wasn't perfectly clear. So when it comes to your guitar body, hopefully this video has helped you out, and you will feel confident in building any type of body that you want. The one type of body we did not cover are bodies that have basically arches on them, where somebody has come in, like on a Les Paul or a Paul Reed Smith, and they have put a large shape on the outside. You can do that actually with specialized router bits, just like I did the top of the Orion with the large bit. There's special router bits you can actually use for that, okay? But many people, what they end up doing is they'll end up using spoke shaves or draw knives, or they'll end up using files or rasps, and they'll just keep working on it and working on it and working on it until it looks the way that they want it, then they start sanding it. Being able to build a guitar body is one thing, but getting good at woodworking is something that is completely separate. And really the only way to get good is to practice, 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 practice. And, you know, get scrap wood. Try some stuff out before you decide to actually, you know, take the leap into building your own guitar body, your own guitar neck, or whatever. You know, there's no shame in going slow, making sure that you got everything right, taking baby steps before you go full on to build your dream guitar. So hopefully you learned something from this video, and until next time, I'm William Gelvin, and I will talk to you later.